Someone you know does well. A friend gets the promotion, the recognition, the relationship, the life that looks like the one you wanted. And instead of the happiness you know you're supposed to feel for them, something darker rises in you. A tightening, a sourness, a quiet ache that feels almost like grief. Their success lands in you as your failure. Their rising makes you feel like you're sinking. You smile and congratulate them, and you mean it, sort of, but underneath there is this other thing, this bitter thing, and you're ashamed of it, because you know you shouldn't feel this way. Why does someone else's good fortune hurt you? Why does their win feel like your loss? You've probably tried to manage this feeling by hiding it, or by judging yourself for having it, or by quietly reframing their success as somehow undeserved, telling yourself they got lucky, or sold out, or aren't as happy as they seem. And maybe that eases the sting for a moment, but the feeling comes back, again and again, every time someone rises, and it leaves you feeling small and poisoned and alone with a bitterness you can't admit to anyone. It's one of the most universal human experiences and one of the least talked about, because almost no one will confess to it. The way other people's success can feel like a personal wound. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this feeling more deeply and more unflinchingly than almost any thinker who ever lived. He gave it a name, ressentiment, and he traced it to its roots, exposing the strange psychology of how envy works, why it poisons us, and how it quietly shapes our values and our lives without our ever admitting what it is. And he understood something crucial, that this bitterness is not just an unpleasant feeling to be ashamed of, but a signal, one that, understood correctly, points the way toward a freer and more powerful way of living. This is a video about why someone else's success feels like your failure, and what Nietzsche believed you could do about it. Friedrich Nietzsche was a 19th-century German philosopher who possessed an almost surgical ability to expose the hidden psychological forces beneath human behavior and morality. He was relentless in his willingness to look at the things people prefer not to see: the envy, the resentment, the will to power, the unflattering motives lurking beneath our noblest-seeming values. And among his most penetrating insights was his analysis of a particular emotional condition that he considered one of the most important and least acknowledged forces in human life. He called it ressentiment. Ressentiment is a French word that Nietzsche used deliberately, and it means something more specific and more toxic than ordinary resentment. Ressentiment is the smoldering, suppressed, festering resentment and envy of those who feel powerless or inferior toward those who seem powerful, successful, or superior. It is the bitterness of the person who feels themselves to be losing, or lesser, directed at the person who seems to be winning. And what makes it resentment, in Nietzsche's specific sense rather than simple envy, is that it cannot be discharged. It cannot be acted upon directly. It has no healthy outlet, and so it turns inward, festering and poisoning the person who carries it, becoming a chronic condition of the soul rather than a passing feeling. Nietzsche understood ressentiment as arising from a specific situation, the situation of feeling impotent in the face of another's superiority. When someone succeeds where we feel we have failed, when they have what we want and cannot get, when their rising highlights our own sense of smallness, a powerful envy arises. But we cannot act on it. We cannot take their success, cannot undo it, cannot easily match it. And crucially, we often cannot even admit it, because envy is shameful, and we do not want to see it in ourselves. So the feeling has nowhere to go. It cannot be expressed, cannot be resolved, cannot be discharged. And so it festers, turning into the chronic, poisonous condition Nietzsche called ressentiment, a bitterness that lives in us, coloring how we see the successful, quietly shaping our judgments and our values, and making other people's good fortune a source of ongoing pain. This is why someone else's success feels like your failure. Because when you are in the grip of ressentiment, you experience the other person's rising as a direct commentary on your own standing. Their success measures your failure, their height reveals your smallness, their winning defines you as losing. The feeling is comparative at its very core. It is not really about them at all. It is about what their success says about you, in the relentless, painful comparison that ressentiment forces you to make. And Nietzsche understood that this comparison is a kind of trap, one that keeps you fixated on others, poisoned by their success, and unable to attend to the only life that is actually yours. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. One of Nietzsche's most brilliant and unsettling insights was his understanding of what ressentiment does when it cannot be expressed directly, how it finds a hidden outlet by transforming itself into something that looks like moral judgment. This is the mechanism by which envy disguises itself, even from the person feeling it, and it operates in almost all of us. When we feel ressentiment toward someone's success, but cannot admit the envy and cannot act on it, Nietzsche observed, we perform a subtle psychological maneuver. We reframe the situation morally. Instead of admitting I envy them and wish I had what they have, we tell ourselves a story in which their success is actually bad, and our lack of it is actually good. They are successful, but they must have compromised themselves to get there. They have what I want, but they're shallow or corrupt or empty inside. They're winning, but winning is for the vulgar. I'm too deep, too principled, too authentic to want such things. In this way, the envy is transformed into moral superiority. We convert our sense of inferiority into a sense of righteousness, telling ourselves that we are better precisely because we have less. Nietzsche saw this maneuver as the secret engine behind a great deal of human morality and judgment. In his analysis of the origins of moral values, he argued that entire moral systems have been built, historically, out of exactly this process, the ressentiment of the powerless transforming itself into moral condemnation of the powerful. The values of the weak, he suggested, often originate not in genuine virtue, but in disguised envy. The reframing of what one cannot have as what one is too good to want, and the condemnation of those who have it as somehow wicked for having it. It is a way of winning, imaginatively, a contest one is losing in reality, of achieving through moral judgment the superiority one cannot achieve, in fact. You can catch this mechanism operating in yourself if you look honestly. When someone succeeds and you find yourself immediately cataloging their flaws, dismissing their achievement, deciding that they're not really happy, or that their success is hollow, or that they compromised something essential to get it, you may be watching your own ressentiment transform itself into judgment, protecting you from the painful admission of envy by converting it into contempt. This is not to say all criticism of the successful is disguised envy. Sometimes success genuinely is achieved through compromise, and sometimes critique is fair. But Nietzsche's challenge is to look honestly at whether our judgment is genuine discernment or whether it is envy wearing the mask of morality, protecting us from a feeling we cannot bear to acknowledge. And here is why this matters so much. As long as our envy is disguised as judgment, we cannot deal with it honestly, because we don't even know it's there. We think we are making fair moral assessments when we are actually managing an unbearable envy. And so the ressentiment persists, hidden from us, poisoning our relationship to others' success and quietly shaping a whole world view organized around the condemnation of what we secretly wish we had. The first step toward freedom, Nietzsche understood, is to strip off the mask, to see the envy for what it is, rather than letting it masquerade as virtue. Nietzsche understood that ressentiment is not merely an unpleasant feeling, but a genuinely poisonous condition, one that harms, above all, the person who carries it. And understanding exactly how it poisons is key to understanding why it is so important to be free of it. The first way ressentiment poisons is that it makes you fundamentally reactive rather than active. It orients your entire being around other people rather than around your own life. Nietzsche drew a crucial distinction between two ways of existing. The noble or healthy way, as he saw it, begins with self-affirmation. It says yes to itself first, defines itself from within, pursues its own values and its own path, and regards others as secondary. The way of ressentiment, by contrast, begins with the other. It is obsessed with those it envies, defined by its opposition to them, unable to look at itself except through the lens of comparison. The person of ressentiment, Nietzsche said, cannot simply be themselves and pursue their own life, because their attention is perpetually captured by the people they envy. They live reactively, their inner world dominated by others' successes, unable to generate their own values or affirm their own existence because they are too busy resenting. The second way ressentiment poisons is that it is fundamentally impotent. It produces suffering without producing any change. Because ressentiment cannot be discharged, cannot be acted upon, it accomplishes nothing except its own perpetuation. The envious person suffers the pain of envy, but does not convert that pain into anything useful. They do not use it as fuel to pursue what they want. They simply marinate in the bitterness, endlessly comparing, endlessly resenting, endlessly poisoned, while their own life goes unlived and unimproved. The energy that could have gone into their own growth is consumed instead by the futile, draining work of resenting others. The third and deepest way ressentiment poisons is that it cuts you off from your own life and your own values. When your attention is perpetually fixed on others' success, you cannot attend to your own path. When you define your worth entirely through comparison, you lose access to any internal sense of what actually matters to you, what you actually want, what would actually fulfill you. The person consumed by ressentiment does not even know what they truly value anymore, because they have outsourced their entire sense of worth to a comparison with others. They have, in a real sense, lost themselves in the act of resenting, becoming a mere function of other people's achievements rather than an author of their own life. Modern research illuminates this poisoning in its own way. A large body of work in psychology, beginning with social comparison theory, has established that human beings have a deep tendency to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to others, and that upward social comparison, measuring ourselves against those who seem better off, is strongly associated with lower self-esteem, envy, and diminished well-being. This tendency has been dramatically amplified in the modern age. Research on social media in particular has repeatedly found that constant exposure to curated images of others' success and happiness fuels upward comparison and is linked to increased envy, depression, and dissatisfaction. What Nietzsche diagnosed as ressentiment, modern research confirms as a genuine and measurable source of human suffering, and one that our comparison-saturated culture has made more pervasive than ever. The endless scroll through others' highlight reels is, in a sense, a machine for manufacturing ressentiment. Nietzsche was not content to diagnose ressentiment. His whole philosophy points toward its overcoming, toward a freer and more self-affirming way of living. His thought, reinforced by modern understanding, suggests a real path out of the poison of envy. The first movement is to admit the envy honestly, to strip off the mask and acknowledge the feeling for what it is. This is the essential and most difficult first step, because ressentiment depends on remaining disguised, hidden even from ourselves behind the mask of moral judgment. The practice is to catch yourself in the act, to notice when someone's success produces that bitter tightening, and to name it honestly. This is envy. I want what they have, and their having it is painful to me. This admission is uncomfortable, even shameful, but it is liberating, because envy that is seen clearly can be worked with, while envy that masquerades as judgment cannot. To simply stop pretending your envy is moral superiority, and to admit the real feeling underneath, is to take the first step out of the trap. The second movement is to read the envy as information, to recognize that what you envy points toward what you actually want and value. Nietzsche understood that our reactions reveal us, and envy is a particularly revealing reaction. The specific successes that wound you the most are telling you something crucial about your own desires. If you feel ressentiment toward someone's creative achievement, it may be because you long to create and are not doing so. If another's freedom galls you, it may be because you crave a freedom you have denied yourself. The practice is to turn the envy into self-knowledge, to ask, what does this envy reveal about what I actually want? Rather than being poisoned by the feeling, you can mine it for information about your own unlived desires, and then use that information to pursue your own path. The third movement is to convert the reactive stance into an active one, to shift your attention from the other person back to your own life. This is Nietzsche's central move. From the reactive posture of ressentiment, obsessed with others, to the active posture of self-affirmation, focused on your own becoming. Once you have admitted the envy and read it for its information, the practice is to redirect the energy. Instead of resenting the person who has what you want, you use the desire the envy revealed as fuel to pursue it yourself. The envy that would have festered as ressentiment becomes, instead, motivation for your own action. And even where the thing envied is genuinely out of reach, the practice is to turn your attention away from the endless, poisonous comparison and back toward the cultivation of your own life, your own values, your own path, the only place where fulfillment can actually be found. The fourth movement is to cultivate genuine self-affirmation, to build the internal sense of your own worth and your own values that makes comparison lose its power. Ultimately, Nietzsche understood, the deepest cure for ressentiment is to become the kind of person who affirms their own life from within, who defines their worth by their own standards rather than by comparison with others, who is too engaged in their own becoming to be captured by others' success. This is the noble stance he admired. The person who says yes to their own existence, pursues their own path, and can therefore witness another's success without feeling diminished by it, because their sense of worth does not depend on being ahead. This is not achieved overnight, but it is cultivated over time, as you shift your attention again and again from comparison to creation, from resenting others to affirming and building your own life. And as you do, something remarkable happens. Other people's success gradually stops feeling like your failure, because you are no longer measuring yourself against them at all. You are too busy becoming who you are. The reason someone else's success feels like your failure is that you have been caught, as nearly all of us are at times, in the trap Nietzsche called ressentiment, the festering comparative envy that turns others' rising into our own sinking, that disguises itself as moral judgment to protect us from admitting it, and that poisons us while leaving our own lives unlived. It is one of the most human of afflictions, and one of the most quietly destructive, because it keeps us perpetually reactive, perpetually comparing, perpetually consumed by others' achievements, while our own path goes unattended. And it is so universal precisely because it is so hard to see, hidden, as it usually is, behind the mask of judgment and the shame that keeps us from admitting what we really feel. But Nietzsche did not diagnose ressentiment in order to condemn us for it. He diagnosed it in order to free us from it, to show us that the bitterness we feel is not a life sentence, but a signal, not a fixed condition, but a trap with an exit. The way out begins with the honesty to admit the envy, continues through the wisdom to read it as information about our own desires, and culminates in the strength to turn from reactive comparison to active self-creation. The very feeling that poisons us, understood correctly, becomes a pointer toward the life we actually want and the fuel to pursue it. The deepest freedom Nietzsche pointed toward is the freedom of the person who no longer needs to compare, who affirms their own existence so fully and is so engaged in their own becoming that others' success is no longer a wound, but simply a fact, sometimes even an inspiration. This person can witness another's rising without sinking, can celebrate what they admire without being diminished by it, because their sense of their own worth comes from within rather than from the endless, poisonous ranking against others. This is not a natural state for most of us. It is an achievement, cultivated over time, as we learn again and again to turn from ressentiment toward self-affirmation. Someone else's success does not have to feel like your failure. That equation, their rising equals your sinking, is the arithmetic of ressentiment, and it is not the truth about your life. Your life is not a competition whose scoreboard is other people's achievements. It is your own singular existence, with its own path and its own possibilities, and it can only be lived by turning your attention away from the comparison that poisons you and toward the creation that fulfills you. The moment you stop measuring your life against theirs and start actually living it is the moment the bitterness begins to lift, and the success of others stops being a mirror of your failure and becomes, at last, simply the success of others, which has nothing to do with the worth of you.